So what it really means, in ES modules, import or export, a module can export things it defines, things it imports, and then re-exports things nested inside it, child modules. So these are the rules of that module, or the things that it can export, the things that it defines within that module, the things that it defines for things that it imported, the things that is nested or inside its child modules that could be private or public. But it cannot magically export a module that lives somewhere else without importing it first. So in short, it cannot export something that it's not within those three constraints. It basically needs to be on that same file. In short, a module can only export what it owns or explicitly imports. So this is what this means. Export declaration declared that a local binding of a module externally visible such that other modules may read the export but can't modify them. Interestingly, modules may export child modules but can't export modules that have been defined elsewhere or from other modules. We can also rename export so that their external name differs from their local names. Concrete example for valid exporting what you define: export cons car manager. So equal by vehicle function, you define car manager, so you can export it. Valid re-exporting chain module, let's say export car manager from ./carmanager.js. This file becomes an aggregator, like a mediator of modules. So even if you're in another file, you can export something from another file if you do that at the first export or first lines of your code. As you can see, we are in index.js, we're not in carmanager.js, but because we specify a car manager from ./carmanager.js to be exported here, and then therefore we can rename it inside this index.js. That's allowed because you're explicitly forwarding it, so it acts like a mediator that we discussed before. So invalid, exporting something you don't own, like random file.js, export car manager. You can't because you didn't specify that it came from car manager.js, and also it needs to be in the same server, or it's the same application, or it should be in the same application code. You cannot do this in a different application code or different app or completely different project. You can export something that isn't defined in this file or imported into this file. That would break modular boundaries. Why this matters architecturally? These rules enforces decoupling. Remember everything we discussed? Command pattern separates issuing from executing. Mediator separates component from direct knowledge. Event bus separates publishers from subscribers. ES modules do the same thing at the file level. So we haven't discussed command pattern, but basically command pattern is that like an HTTP request. So instead of telling how to do it, you tell it declaratively. So instead of imperatively telling others, like micromanaging them, you're telling them what you want to accomplish, and it's up to them to accomplish it. So that's the coupling. In mediator, it separates components from direct knowledge. So basically, you have some central workflow or You have a central component that manages how the component will act without them knowing the implementation details of the component of others in the system. So it kind of like your manager, um, like manager, like they don't necessarily, you don't necessarily know what other or employee handles. But let's say in your company, like you have director and from another department, he will coordinate you, right? So that's like to that department. So that's the mediator. Event bus separates publishers from subscribers. So event bus basically it's the we will discuss this in the future, but you're basically publishing something and it's up to the subscriber to subscribe to it. But there's more to it, we'll just discuss that moving forward. So they enforce clear ownership boundaries. How this connects to your LiveKit example, think about your hook, use room chat controller. So these are hook. It does dispatch message colon toggle underscore chat. It does not import chat panel from dot slash chat panel and then call chat panel directly. Chat panel that open. Why? Because that would violate modular boundaries. Your controller module does not own chat panel. It issues a command instead. So the controller, which is this hook, does not own this chat panel. Therefore, it would be better for it to issue a command rather than being aware of that, because those use room chat controller implementation could change. That's architectural decoupling at runtime. ES modules enforce decoupling at build time. So in use room chat controller, we do that kind of like an architectural decoupling at runtime. We make sure that in runtime, we don't want this hook or one component needing to know the other just to be able to achieve its goal. So it's kind of like with about face as well. If you could like minimize the task, because being aware of other components is kind of like add cognitive load. So it added like a task for them. So another way of looking at it is that the implementation and interface, you would just want an interface or the goal instead of having the abstraction or the implementation of that. So that's the architecture, the use room controller, while the ES module or the newer version of JavaScript enforce this decoupling at build time rather than at runtime. So the deeper module at build time or compile time. The deeper meaning, modules define what is private, internal implementation, what is public, exported API. When they say modules may export child modules, they mean a module can act as an aggregator. So meaning aggregator or kind of like a mediator as well. You become like a middleman. So you can see index.js doesn't really have the methods of this, but because it export or explicitly tell it to export it from that folder, or because it's in the same server or it's in the same application code, it is able to do this export. So that's one of the advantage. So the reason why you cannot do that with other server is because if it's an other server, you won't be able to export it just like this, because you don't have access on that file. Like, and it also not architecturally it doesn't support that, because like for security, etc. ES modules in the same source code can do this. So this becomes a barrel file. It organizes child modules into a clean public interface. So another a use case of this is actually, it may seem like counterintuitive, but it organizes its child module, which is this index.js, into a clean public interface. So instead of uh, letting others know where are those located, the chat controller video, you just call index.js. So it's another way of hiding the complexity or implementation that's similar to Redux store exporting reducers. So it's a similar concept why the Redux export reducers, Express exporting routers, your controller exporting command functions. So Express, the reason why it used like these routers, um, and then like it used the routers. You're not aware of the routers, right? You each route that this request could pass through. So you just contacting Express, and it's up to Express how it will export it within its own logic or implementation. Your controller exporting command functions. It's the same with controller. You don't want to be aware with the other objects. So why they forbid exporting arbitrary external modules? Imagine if any file could just export random global object. You'd lose traceability, ownership clarity, dependency visibility. So you'll not be able to know which object does what, which makes software debugging hard, even which make the software even harder. Ownership clarity, which is important in construction pattern, dependency visibility. ES modules require import x from ./x.js, then export x. You must declare dependency explicitly. That is the language enforcing loose coupling. So this architectural design that allows you to import x from ./x.js before you can export that in that file is what actually declare dependency explicitly. So that is actually the language of loose coupling. It might seem simple, but that's what provide that benefits. So how this connect to design patterns? Let's connect it to everything. We've discussed concept command pattern. At runtime, send intent instead of calling directly. At file level, export functions instead of exposing internals. So we have a command pattern at runtime, which is the actual command pattern, but at file level or at build time, that command pattern become the export built-in of JavaScript mediator. At runtime, coordinates without type coupling, so just like Express. At file level, barrel files coordinate module exposure. So that's also at runtime. It doesn't allow you to just export any module that you didn't explicitly imported. Event bus at runtime decouples components. At file level, imports or exports decouple files. Redux dispatch at runtime, send action instead of calling reducers. At file level, reducers exported, not invoked directly. So at file level, you would export this reducers just like with dispatch or use chat room controller we have in LiveKit. But at runtime, you send an actions or command instead of calling that reducers that you exported at build time. So the philosophy is identical. System should communicate through defined interfaces, not through direct access to internals. The big idea of chapter 5. This chapter isn't about syntax, it's about architecture enforcement at build time. Before ES6, JavaScript had no real module boundaries. Everything could be global, tight coupling was easy. After ES 2015, every file is a scope. You must explicitly export, you must explicitly import. The language now supports proper architecture, which is why patterns like command, mediator, observer, facade, module pattern are much cleaner in modern JS. So the reason why it's much cleaner is because it's not, you don't, um, like, even it's in the file level or build time level, you're unconsciously are already doing these patterns. So if you add that, it will be much cleaner and more organized. So module has this advantage. That's why it was added to the modern JavaScript. Final mental model, think of modules like countries. You can export citizens, functions, classes, import foreign citizens, re-export imported citizens, but you cannot export the citizens from another country unless you officially bring them in first. That keeps border clear, and clean borders equals scalable architecture. Note, MJS is an extension used for JavaScript modules that help us distinguish between module files and classic scripts. The .mjs extension ensures that corresponding files are parsed as a module by runtime and build tools, for example, Node.js and Babel. So at runtime, even in browser, the .mjs allows the browser to see or to, if the browser see this extension, it will parse it as module. So we will continue with this in the next videos.